right. All right. So welcome back. Hopefully everybody had a good summer break. Hopefully you made the most of it because I think that is our last major break until oh man, that is sounding bad out there. Until December, I believe. Outside of that, let's go ahead and start off talking about making sure that everybody is aware that today is your deadline for your week 1 competency. So you still have a chance to utilize today's lab. So make sure that you get that submitted by 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. All our times are based off of Eastern time. So that means all the lecture activities and also the competencies. Now, like I said, you still have lab today if you want to take advantage of that. Now, as always, let's go ahead and talk about being late. All right. So here at 3DF, we do allow extensions, but you need to reach out to us on FSO. Like my favorite way of actually getting requested of extensions is if you request the extension on the actual project that you want an extension on. So that way, when you ask it, we can go ahead and mark it right then and there. So it is good form to make sure that you request the extension. That's how you would professionally approach any client or any job. So make sure that you do that. Now, with that said, what does the extension get you? Well, when you request an extension, you automatically get. So even if we don't respond back, keep in mind that you automatically get that extension. It is always 3 days past the extended deadline. So for y'all, if you ask for extension, you will have until the end of Thursday to get that submitted. Now, we do not have any late deductions for being late, but it's a double-edged sword. Keep in mind that when you are extending your deadline on week 1, you're taking time away from week 2. And it's one of those effects that will keep on snowballing. And the problem really hits home is that on week 4, there is no extensions. We cannot extend past the week 4 deadline. So you're going to have to figure out a way to make up that time. So with that said, make sure that if you use the extension, make sure that you are making the most of it and not taking up the whole entire time, because that means that you're just going to have less time to work with and going into week 2 and week 3, and eventually you'll hit that brick wall on week 4. Also, make sure that you request extensions, and sometimes it is better just to submit what you have before the deadline, so that way you can focus on the upcoming deadlines. Now, what happens if you submit past the deadline for the extension is an automatic 0. No ifs, ands, or buts. If you submit after the extension deadline, it is a 0. So it's one of those double-edged swords where we do not take off any late deduction, but if you submit it past the extension, it is a 0. So make sure that you're being aware of that and that you are utilizing them if needed. All right, outside of that, do we have any questions before we start? Any questions, concerns, or anything like that? What's up? FSO is Full Sail Online. So when you message us through Full Sail Online, that is messaging us through FSO. And I prefer it that way because it saves you time, because you don't have to do the email subject header, like, hey, I'm so-and-so, this is my class, all that stuff right there. If it's on Full Sail Online, I can only see the messages for the people that are in that section. And it's also easier to track down your stuff. All right. You're welcome. Any other questions? All right. So outside of that, again, make sure that you're aware of today's lab. We also have Discord help sessions throughout this week. Now, keep in mind, some of y'all did ask questions last week. I know that Brian probably answered some, and some other instructors. Meanwhile, other instructors were actually on vacation that week. So don't feel bad, or hopefully that did not anger anybody, that if you asked for help that there was no one there. That's because last week a lot of us were out of office. Now, with that said, I did go back and look at a lot of the Discord conversations, and I'm seeing a lot of very helpful students. So definitely lean on your peers as well too. We're here to help you, and we're all here as a community. So with that said, let's go ahead and start talking about our lecture today. So I'm not going to go over competency 2 just yet. I will start talking about that on Wednesday, since I want y'all still to focus on getting your week 1 stuff done. But let's go ahead and introduce modeling tools. All right. So when it comes to modeling tools, we're going to start off with some basic tools that honestly, it's going to be very hard to build anything without these three major basic modeling tools. Now, with that said, there is way more tools than what we're going to be able to show you in this class, let alone this month. And it's going to help you tremendously if you go and explore the different tools. Now, one of the main things that I always try to hammer home, which is instead of learning the tool's name, learn its purpose. Once you understand its purpose, because depending on what program you're actually in, certain tools may be named different things, but they all have the same function. And that is the whole notion, is if we can learn the concepts of 3D, Maya may not be king forever. Blender may finally emerge and like take over the industry the same way that they've been saying for like the last 10 years. Well, that may eventually happen, and you have to be able to exist outside the programs that you're currently in. So understanding the concepts will help you translate to those different UIs. Now, with that, let's go ahead and grab our first lecture activity. So I'm gonna go right here. Go ahead and move that up. And as always, if you want my slides, they are available on the Discord. So if you go to the 3DF announcement section, you will be able to grab and download those. I strongly suggest getting those because, again, if you have a hard time taking notes, these can actually help you. If you can answer the questions that are on the slides, that will kind of put you on the right foot on getting help. Not getting help, taking notes. Blah. All right, with that said, let's go right here. I'm gonna go into my week 2. Now, keep in mind, all the concepts and all the tools that we are showing today cannot be used on any of your week 1 stuff. Remember, your week 1 stuff content is isolated to the content that you learned during week 1. While we're going to learn some tools, they will not be able for you to available for you to use on your week 2, meaning week 1 competency. All right. It's always a wonder what a week off will do to, like, getting used to talking again. All right, so with that said, I'm gonna go right here and I'm gonna grab my intro to modeling tools. And as always, for bulk of these projects, they're going to be Maya projects. So let's kind of go through the process again so we can have a brief refresher of how we properly open up a Maya project. So I'm gonna go right here. I'm going to expand this. I'm going to select this and hit Control C to copy. Then I'm gonna go to my documents, go into my 3DF folder. I'm in now week 2, and I've already created my week 3, week 4, week 5. One of the things that you're probably noticing is I have like little green checks on each one of my folders. If you haven't yet, which I do believe as part of your tuition, you do get access to Office, or what was it called? Their Open Drive or whatever, their OneDrive. I think you get like a huge amount of storage. And one of the things is that you want to make sure that your files, your most valuable commodity, has some way of being backed up. So if you're looking right now, I have Google Drive. You can do the same thing with OneDrive or Dropbox, but instead I have this constantly backing up my files. So if I do lose something, I can be able to grab a different source for it. Likewise, I do switch between Mac and Windows, and this will allow me to actually carry my files in between those 2 OSs. All right, with that said, I got my week 3. I'm gonna hit Control V and paste that in. So now that I have that in there, the first thing I want to do is open up Maya. So I already went through the process of opening up Maya. I did not double click on my file whatsoever. Instead, I opened up Maya first. Remember, when we open up Maya, it's not only loading the program, which is a big memory hog, but also it's loading up tons of different plugins that helps it do its job. We do not want to add our files into that equation. Now at this point, we can go right here. I'm going to go ahead and switch this back to perspective. And then we're going to go right here to File, Open. And then we want to go right here, go to my documents. And again, if I'm using the same folder over and over again, I can go ahead and make a bookmark by just dragging that over. Go to my week 2, go to my lecture 3, and intro to modeling tools. This is the main directory of this project. So with this selected, and I can tell that this is main directory because if I open this up, I should see immediately afterwards a workspace mail. But at this point right here, I'm gonna go and set project. Drag that over again. Week 2, lecture 3, select that, hit set, and now we can go right here, scenes, intro to modeling tools. All right, so right here, let's go ahead and imagine that we're in the process of doing a Tetris movie. So we're about to model these bad boys. Well, as always, we always have to have a rhyme and a reason to why we do things. So at this point right here, we went through the concept of objects and then their components. We had the polygon, which is our preferred way of building stuff, which is either a 3-sided face with its triangles or our more preferred way, which is a quad, which is a 4-sided face. Then we learned there's a limitation of what we can do with geometry. So outside of selecting the whole thing and scaling it and rotating it and moving around, there's only so much that we can do at a object level. So unless we're trying to make an entire movie about a whole bunch of boxes and cubes and spheres, we have to drill down and actually get into the nitty-gritty of details. So that's when we started getting into components. Components allow us to have smaller and smaller levels of influence so we can make more distinct and detailed changes. But at a certain point, components and our objects hit a brick wall where we cannot move beyond that without using tools to actually add in that detail. So we look right here. Obviously, we can see a couple of objects right here. Check that around a little bit. For some reason, it was lagging. All right, so with that said, we can already see from this picture, we have 2 main objects that we could probably just build with using our object mode, component mode, and using our cardinal 3 movements, which is translate, rotate, and scale. So obviously we have this cube. We can go right here. And just a brief refresher, I can go ahead and hold down D as in dog, V as in Victor, snap my pivot to right there. That will allow me to snap my pivot. Remember, when we move around our pivot, and when we scale, rotate, and move, we're not moving around the object by its own center point. Instead, we're doing it based off of where our pivot is. So moving it right there to that corner will lock it down, allow me to scale out, and forming that shape a little bit easier. So right there, we got our cube block. Pretty easy, all right? Pretty lame, model, but we got that done. Likewise, we could also go right here and skew this out, but if we want to be a little bit more technical, we can go ahead and right click and go to vertex mode or edge mode or face mode. One of these right here will do the same thing, but I like to use vertex mode, which will allow me to select that entire side right there. Remember, when we select, it selects all the way through. So the front and the back at the same time. So that's why we want to make sure that we can select and marquee select that. And then we can hit W on our keyboard to bring up our translate tool and move that over. And move that over as well too. And from there, we got our L block. No, the L blocks are at the top right there. But we have whatever this straight line piece is. All right. Any questions so far? That's kind of like a brief distilling of like what we talked about in week 1. But now, let's go ahead and start with the L blocks at the top. This is where we run into that limitation of what we can do with our geometry. At a certain point, we need more. We just need more. Whether it's more edges, more faces, more vertexes, we just need more to start to get more complex detail. Because when we're trying to do this L block, well, I can go in the vertex mode, select this, and I can make it go that way. But how do I go about making it go up and still make that L block? Well, we have a number of different ways. All right, so first thing that we're going to talk about is extrusion. Extrusion is one of the main tools that you will use. Like I said, these tools right here that I'm about to go over it's going to be very hard for you to make anything without at least using them once. And what extrusion does, and the concept behind it, is when we have an object and we need more geometry to come out of that object, we extrude it out. All right. Now, other programs call it different things, but the fact is that the concept is that right now we have an object, and we see from our profile, from our reference, that we need more geometry to be there so we can emulate what we're seeing. So with that, how do we start extruding? Well, let's go right here. And how do I bounce between my windows? What was the hotkey for that? Space bar, sweet. So we go right here, go to space bar, and what we want to do is select a profile. What is a profile? Well, it's going to be the shape that we're going to extrude out of it. All right, so what that means is, if I go right here and select this face, when I extrude it out, it will emulate that face, all right, that square look. So if I wanted something a little bit more round, then I would need to go back and actually make sure that the profile shape that I'm extruding out is round. And that's one of the key concepts. So if you ever, hopefully everybody's played with Play-Doh, but you've ever used the extrusion machine, whatever shape that you put there, whether it's star, circle, square, whatever you press through that thing will attain that shape. Same way here. So to do this, we can do this a couple different ways. First, we're going to go right here to Edit Mesh and go to Extrude. And when we do that, it will bring up my multi-tool. Now, with my multi-tool, a couple things that we're going to see right here. First, by default, with extrusion, it will always go to local pivot. So remember how we had two different types of orientations. We had local and global. Global means everything observes the world's X, Y, and Z. Y is always up, X is always left and right, and Z is our depth. Meanwhile, local is based off of how that selected object sees X, Y, and Z. Going back to my analogy that I view up differently than somebody who is in Australia. We will be looking in different angles. Same way here. All right. So the reason why this goes to local by default is because it gives us a little bit more control. Now, with that said, let's go right here. Go ahead, hit spacebar again. And pull that out. Now, once we do that, that's perfectly fine. That's looking good. So let's go ahead and select this one right here. So here's one of the things that you're going to learn, if you haven't yet, about Maya. The same stuff exists in hundreds of different places inside Maya, because the notion is that one way is going to make sense for you, and you're going to utilize that to speed up your workflow. So I'm going to show you at least 4 different ways to extrude. All of them do the same damn thing, all right? It's just different ways of getting to the same tool. So if we go right here, first, with that face selected, we can go to Edit Mesh, and we saw hitting Extrude right there. But next to it, we can also see its hotkey, which is Control E. So that's our next way of doing this. So if we go right here, hit Control E, and now it will allow me to do that extrude. Now, as we use tools, a couple things that you're going to notice is, one, when we activate the tool, it will give us a radio window right here. This radio window is the same thing that we saw pretty much with the history stacks that we talked about on last Friday, 2 weeks ago. But the fact is that this allows us to quickly get to some of the more important settings on these tools, because all these tools have settings. In the same way that we could edit our primitives and add in subdivisions and add in different flair to it, same thing that we can do right here. So if I go and select thickness, I can go right here and middle mouse, click and drag and interact with that right there. Now, with that said, all these tools also exist inside the tool settings. So whenever in our toolbar, whenever we have a tool currently, it will always be housed right here. So if we have a tool in hand, it is housed in that little icon right there. And that icon will change based on what tool we have. Now, what does that mean? Well, same way that we can go right here and double click on my move tool. When I do that, it brings up the tool settings. Same thing for each one of my tools. I can go right here, double click on this, and that will bring up my tool setting. This is important because one, this may scare the crap out of you, that's perfectly fine. Once you get more into modeling, you will go into your tools and start manipulating them and changing the settings so you can get the preferred elements that you need. But what is more importantly important right now for y'all at this stage is sometimes your tools act weird. That's when you need to double click on the settings and tell it to reset. Because there's certain tools that their settings will apply to a ton of different objects, and you'll probably leave it on those settings the whole entire time unless you have a very specific purpose. Meanwhile, there's certain tools that you only use with a very, very set purpose that you won't get in the habit of constantly resetting the tool. But when things are not working properly, you always want to go right here and click on the tool that is not working and hit reset. That will solve a lot of your issues. That and setting your project properly. All right, with that said, I'm gonna go right here and move that to where it needs to be, and we're done with that L block. Now, that was two ways of extruding. Now, let's go ahead and show you a different way. So I'm gonna go right here, grab that face, kind of just move it right there so we can kind of make that little elbow joint. But from right there, our next way that we're going to use is we talked about a little bit the different hotkey menus that we can bring up, like little different marquee menus. So first, we talked about how we can bring up, hold down Control, right click, and it brings up the marquee menu for changing around our different selections. So right now I have faces selected. If I wanted to convert this to, let's say, vertexes, convert to vertexes. That is a quick way of changing around my selection. I can either grow them, I can shrink them, all that stuff right there. That is my Control marquee menu. All right. Holding down Control and right click. Now, if you're on Mac, it will probably be Command right click. Like I said, 95% of the hotkeys for Maya are the same for Maya and Mac, except for like the random oddballs. And even they don't even get it right. Remember, like it says right here, Control Z is our undo, when Z is the actual undo hotkey. So they don't even get it correctly. With that said, another combination that we can do is we did Control right click. That is our our selection marquee menu. But if I hold down Shift right click, this will bring up my context marquee menu. Now, keyword right there is context, because that menu will change based off of what you have selected. And that's actually one of my preferred ways of actually modeling, which is using the context marquee menu. And the reason for that is that Maya has a ton of tools, which I do implore you to actually explore. If you haven't yet, there is a very good video. I was about to say great video. I think it's great. I'll actually say, yeah, it's great. But, and I'm just killing time so I can actually get to the window. So, if you haven't yet, at the bottom of this page, and there we go. At the bottom of this page, there is a great video by Flip Normals where they go through and just kind of give you the one-liners for like a lot of Maya's tools. So this is a great way to get a visual feedback of the different tools that are available to you. And I will tell you, every tool right now in Maya is available to you except for two. That is, right now, there will be no beveling this week. We will talk about beveling next week. And there is the Boolean tool, which you will never use in this class right here. And you're probably going like, well, why don't we do that? At this point right here, beveling Booleans is a more advanced concept. And it requires you to understand geometry and how to fix it properly. Now, I always get questions, well, what if I fix it properly? Well, if you use a Boolean properly, I should never be able to tell that you used a Boolean at all. So, little side note right there. But anyway, so going back to shift right click. So shift right click will give me keys or give me certain options and tools that are based off of what I have selected. So right now I have a face selected. So if I hold down shift right click, I can see that we have merge face to center, multi-cut, wedge face, all that stuff right there. But at the bottom, we have extrude face. If I go right here, switch this to edges, when I hold down shift right click, I now get a completely different menu because it's only showing me options that I can use on the selection. That helps filter out a lot of the tools that I may not need or be able to use whatsoever. So with that said, let's go ahead. I'm going to select this. I'm going to hold down shift right click and hit extrude. And when we do that, I can go ahead, pull this out. And now I'm on my way to making the rest of this L block. Now, last but not least, I'm going to show the last way. And the reason why I want to bring this last way up is because it's very easy to accidentally hit this right here, which is if we hold down, if we hit W and bring up our move tool, and we can also do this on rotate and scale as well. But if I hold down shift and hover over my arrow, we will see the word extrude pop up. And when we do that, we can extrude out. Now we have to be careful with that because when it comes to extrude is a very powerful tool. And like I said, it's very hard to build anything without extruding. But it can blow up your geometry, by which I mean there has been, and this will happen to you at least once this week, I promise you. But when we go right here and shift right click and go to extrude, what will happen is occasionally you will hit extrude and accidentally click off and your tool disappears. Well, if you look at that, most of y'all would probably go like, all right, cool, I accidentally exited out of the extrusion tool. Let me go ahead and extrude again. The problem is that even though the tool went bye-bye, that extruded face did not. Which means if I go right here and extrude again, nothing of any particular interest is going to pop out. But the problem is that if we go right here and right click, now we talked about edges, vertexes, and faces. Let's go ahead and talk about vertex faces, which is a hybrid way of looking at our object. So if I go right here and right click, go to vertex faces, one of the things that's going to really pop out to us is what? These lines. Now, you're probably going like, oh, is that just is showing us edges that are just kind of hanging around? Well, if you remember that whole notion of the pyramid of influence, which is you have object mode, you have face mode, you have edge mode, and you have vertex mode. When we flip it over, that's also a pyramid of existence. Vertexes and edges cannot exist without faces being there. And what does that mean? Well, those edges are not edges. They're just very, very small faces, scrunched down until they're pretty much aligned, but that is a face. That is your leftover extrude. So that's why you have to be careful when you extrude. If you accidentally click off the tool, get in the habit of, if your extrusion doesn't work properly, make sure that you undo right then and there, because these fixes are easier to undo than go back and try to fix later on. So go right here. I'm going to undo a bit. And that is about it for extrude. Now, for this project, you have two different options of completing it. First, you can either do the bare minimum, which is fine. You pick and choose your battles. But the fact is that all you have to do for this lecture activity is to finish out the extrusions on the rest of the Tetris blocks. But I'm going to take this a step further and actually show you the different ways that we can use the other tools and just kind of play around with them. So you can choose to either just do the extrusions and upload that as your lecture activity, or you can kind of show me the results of you playing around with the different tools. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and I'm just going to finish the rest of these. So I'm going to go right here, select that face. And just extrude that down using my shift key. Now, we can also remember I can also extrude using my scale as well too. So if I have both sides selected at the same time, and I'm just going to double select, check my selection. But if I go right here and then just scale this out while holding down shift, see how now we're actually able to extrude both at the same time. Likewise, I could have also did that with a extrude using my shift right click, which I'll probably do in a few seconds. Actually, probably not. All right. Next, we're gonna go right here and do the same thing. I'm gonna go ahead and just hold down shift right click, extrude that out. Right click, go back to the face mode, change to that face right there. And then I can hit Control E, which is another form of extrusion. Bring that down. And then last but not least, I can go right here and go into my menus and select it this way. What's up? So if I hold down shift, that's activating the extrusion, but instead of me moving them out separately with the transforms, I'm instead scaling them away from each other. So I scaled them in the X. And so if you hold down shift while you're extruding out, and we can also do the same thing by just going right here. So if I go right here and select this face and select this face, and then if I hit R to bring up my scale, if I hold down shift while scaling this out, it'll do both at the same time. Likewise, if I just have them selected like this right here, I can hold down shift right click, go to extrude. And since I am in local mode, I can actually pull it out on the Z axis right here. And what it's going to do is actually pull it out on its normal direction. So the direction that it's facing. So when I do this one this way, it's doing the one on the opposite side the other way because their normals are facing opposite from each other. And that's one of the perks of actually using local mode. That's why it defaults to local mode. So either way is perfectly fine. Or I could just do them one at a time if I wanted to. And then let's go right here. Extrude that out. Control E. Extrude that down. And probably the slowest way is going into Edit Mesh and then going right here to extrude, because now you have to go in the menu. And again, one of the perks of Maya is finding out which way makes sense to you and which way speeds you up. All right. And then last but not least, we're just going to do this one right here. Again, holding down shift, bring that out. Select that, holding down shift, bring that up. And then selecting this, holding down shift, bringing that over. You can only get to the radio. What was just asked was, how do you get to the radio menu that pops up when you do extrude? You can only get to it using either the Edit Mesh extrude, the shift right click extrude, or the Control E. You won't get to that option if you use the shift move. The shift move extrude is meant for speed. It's not meant for like actually doing a lot of delicate extrusions that need those extra settings. Because we'll learn, I believe, next week that we can actually tell extrusions to follow a path. So I can actually draw out a path and then tell it, hey, follow that path. But we will learn that next week. All right, with that said, those are our Tetris blocks. And if you want to, that can be our main submission. Now, I'm not going to go over how we submit this just yet. I'm going to wait until I get this done with me, like messing around with the other tools. But make sure, as always, when you submit your lecture activities, that you're following these rules and guidelines right here, because you will lose points if it does not meet up with these screenshot guidelines. So in this case right here, Maya is maximized, perspective camera is maximized, set the models to wireframe on shaded, which we'll show you in a little bit, and make sure that it's easily viewable in all frames, which right here, perspective camera. All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and reintroduce a tool that we showed you last week, which is the Insert Edge Loop tool. But let's kind of talk about its different options that we can use. So
Excuse
first,
me, please.
yes,
I have a question. I had my hand up.
okay. You can also
Um,
ask the question in the chat as well too.
I did.
Oh, nothing comes up when I command right click. So try to do control right click if you're in Maya as well too.
I tried that too, and plus, I've said before, you know how you be moving your cameras around. When
Yes.
I go on the full scale, my cameras don't move. I don't know, is it because still in 2020? I tried to upgrade, none of that's working. My
So
other
with
cameras
that
don't
case right
move.
there, you definitely want to go to today's lab. So they can have a look at it and help you kind of assess that right there, because it may be specific options on your computer or in your program. So they'll be able to kind of weed that out.
Okay.
Right. So yeah, today lab is going to be from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. So anytime during that period, you're more than welcome to drop in there and ask them for help, and you'll be able to screen share and they'll be able to see what's going on.
Okay. So if you can't get it in doing like the shift command and control, you go up there to the edit mesh and mesh tools and the mesh display to get it. Just like you say, you hit
Yes, they're all the
shift.
same extrudes. It's just different ways of actually getting to it.
Right, it's like you go to that object window and hit the vertex and edges. I can't get that either. I've hit the command, right click, shift, control, all that.
So in that case right there, that is something that definitely you want to go to lab and have them take a look at. Because right now, without being able to see your screen or anything like that, we won't be able to diagnose that properly.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So with that said, so we went over extrusions. So we want to next go over, kind of reintroduce a tool that we talked about last week, which was, if we go right here and go into mesh tools, we have insert edge loop tool. So remember what edge loop is. An edge loop is a succession of like different edges that connect one to each other end to end, and normally they form a loop. Now, do they always connect up with each other? No, sometimes they will run into a junction that prevents them from making its way through the surface. Because remember, the perks of using quads is that Maya can kind of see the surface direction. If it enters in through the left, it knows where the right is. Same way, if it enters through the top, it knows to exit through the bottom. So that is the purpose of our edge loops. Our edge loops can set up tracks for our tools to work properly. And sometimes we need extra tracks. So if we go right here, go to mesh tools, and I'm going to go ahead and bring up the insert edge loop tool. Now, one of the things that we want to kind of take notice is that, remember how we talked about the hotkeys. The W is to translate, the E is to rotate, and R is scale. And we also talked about Q. Q is our marquee select tool. This is important to know because Q is a way of quickly dropping your tools. And the reason why we want to get in the habit of constantly hitting Q once we are done with our tool is because if you look right there, our insert edge loop tool looks suspiciously very close to our marquee select tool. But wherever we click, it's going to actively drop in edges. Now, we may want edges there, but sometimes we may not want edges there. So we have to be careful about making sure that we're using Q as in queen to drop our tools. So with that said, same way we showed you last week, which was if I wanted to drop an edge loop, which remember, it's going to look at our surface direction and follow that track. So right here, our edges that are going parallel with each other, that makes an edge ring. So when I drag across that edge ring, it's going to draw this edge loop all the way around. Now, we barely touched on this last week. That's because this week we're going to talk about the actual tools settings that we can actually play around with. So first, I'm going to go ahead and modify the shape a little bit right here. And then I'm going to delete this edge loop. Now, who remembers how you properly delete an edge loop? Yeah, control delete. Yep. All right, so Remember, we want to use Control Delete, or we can also use Edit Mesh and use right there. I'm kind of blind. Right there, delete edge / vertex. Because the key thing is that if we just hit delete, it's going to leave behind our vertexes, and that's going to break our surface. So, with that said, let's go right here, and I'm going to bring back up that insert edge loop. And I'm going to double click on here, and let's go ahead and look at the different options that we have right here. So first, when we are using our insert edge loop tool, it's very cut and dry. It's going to follow around that edge ring until it either hits a point where it can't go any further, or it meets up back with itself. But how it is implemented into our surface can change based off of what we have here. First, we have relative distance from our edge, which means as I click and drag on my object right here, it will try to emulate or interpolate between the different angles that we have right here. So as I get closer, it's going to start mimicking this side right here. Meanwhile, as I get closer to this side, it's going to start mimicking the edge loop that is right there. And this allows us to have some kind of uniformity with our objects and our edges, kind of keeping it nice and clean. But sometimes we want our edges to maintain a shape. That's when we go right here to maintain position and do equal distance from edge, which means whatever edge loop that I'm closest to, it's going to mimic that and stay that way. So if I want to, let's say in more cases than not, if I have a slant right here, I still want to have a straight edge loop right next to it. So if I go right here and go closer to my straight edge loop, I can actually maintain that and bring that a little bit closer. Last but not least, sometimes one is not enough. Sometimes I need multiple. And we'll actually have a case of this on Wednesday when we are trying to actually deform an object. When it comes to deforming our object, changing its shape, and adding in details, we need geometry there. And I don't want to sit there and click 50, 100 times on an object to add individual edge loops. So instead, I can just go right here and jack this up to, I don't know, 50. And click. And when I click once, bam, I have 50 edge loops. Now, obviously, I wouldn't do this willy-nilly because that's just a waste of geometry, because the more geometry we have, the more issues it's going to be to make smaller and smaller changes or get bigger changes. So we want to keep it as low poly as long as possible and then add as we need it. Now, this is a strong case of, hey, I got the settings. This was a very specific case of me showing you this. So now I don't need these settings anymore. So this would be a case that I would go into my tool settings by double clicking on here, which the window's already up. And I can go ahead and hit reset tool. And now I'm back to default. So again, if my tool is acting weird, we can reset it. Now, we can either get to the tool settings again by either double clicking on the icon for the tool that we're using, or every time that we see a little box right here next to a tool, that's also the option window as well too. So that is the same way, two different ways to get to the same thing. All right, so that is our insert edge loop tool. That is one of the few tools outside the delete control that you can still use on your week one. Remember, extrusions are not allowed for your week one competency. When you close out Maya completely, does it automatically reset? Nope. Maya will remember all your tool settings, even when you close it. That's why it's good to always go back and reset them from time to time. All right, so from there, let's show you right there. So pretty much think of insert edge loop tool as like, a cleaver. We're just cleaving through the whole entire thing, and wherever we drop in an edge loop, it's going to go all the way around. So I'm chopping all the way through it. But sometimes when it comes to detail, we want to be a little bit more surgical. So we need something that allows us to purposely place in edges, even when those edges may not lead to the cleanest geometry. And that's where we get into the multi-cut tool, which is our scalpel. So if I go right here, I can go to mesh tools and go to multi-cut. Now, if I go right here and hold down shift right click, I can also get to the multi-cut by being in object mode. And when I have it selected in object mode, shift right click will go ahead and bring up the multi-cut. And what this will allow me to do is I can start from the edge. It has to always be from the edge or from the vertex. I can't be in the middle of the face. But if I click on the edge and drag, it will insert a vertex. And then from there, I can start drawing out more edges. And wherever I click, it will implement a new vertex. Now I can go edge by edge if I want to make sure that I'm staying as precise as possible. Or I can click over multiple objects and it will try to project that onto my surface. Now, keyword project, because of how I'm cutting this, it's using the camera to help draw this. So if I want to make sure that I'm being precise, I need to go edge by edge, but I can actually go from one side all the way over to the other side, and it will use the camera to help project that along. Now, another reason why we have to understand that as projection is that changing our camera angle can affect how it works. So we have to be careful about how we look at it. But now I'm going to go ahead, and it doesn't do a good job sometimes closing up like that. So instead, what I like to do from time to time as I'm drawing, I may not be done with my cut, but I like to enter in what I already cut. So what does that mean? Well, I want to solidify this cut. And to do that, but keep my tool up, I can right click. Right clicking will enter in this edge that I just drew, but keep up my multi-cut tool. If I just hit enter, what it's going to do is enter in that edge, but then it's going to drop the tool. So instead, I'm going to right click. And now I'll go and continue cutting. So in this case right here, I'm going to draw from right there, right there. I do have a big N-gon right here. So I need to quad that up, which means I need to take that N-gon, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 faces, and somehow turn it into a bunch of quads. In this case, I'm going to just draw from this corner to this corner. Now, when dealing with vertexes, notice that I'm not, even though it gives me the option to kind of hover over that vertex and click on it to draw in that edge, I hardly ever do that. And this is a personal preference for me, because being slightly off that vertex, it may look like they're connected, but they're not, and it's creating problem geometry. So instead, what I like to do is click on the edge and slam it into the corner. So click on it, slam it into the corner. So that way I'm making sure that it's slammed into that vertex and it's getting merged up. Click right there. And then click right there. And now I have this new surface that now, since I drew it in, I can go ahead and probably modify it a little bit more, modify my profile. And since I modified the profile, I can go right here and now extrude out a cool shape. So right here, just making sure that I have that selected, shift right click, extrude. And now I have this weird saddle thing on it. Now, that is how we can use multi-cut to be a little bit more surgical. I can start on the edge, I can start clicking around and draw in my own edges without regards of whether or not it's making problem geometry. Like remember, Maya, and we'll talk about problem geometry more and how we clean it up on Wednesday, but what makes it can be either a pro or con, however you look at it. Maya just pretty much lets you do your own thing and then just expects you to go back and fix it when it needs to be fixed. So with that said, that is the surgical part of our multi-cut tool, but it wouldn't be called multi-cut tool if that was the only thing that it did. So let's go ahead and go back into my mesh tools, go into multi-cut. And instead of me clicking on edges, let's say I want to insert an edge loop really quick. Well, I don't want to have to hop into my insert edge loop tool constantly. So instead, I can hold down Control, and that will turn my multi-cut tool into a insert edge loop tool. Control, and then it will turn it into a multi-cut tool. Now, while holding down Control, I can also hold down Shift. So Shift and Control, and that will allow me to snap to different intervals. Right now it's set to like 10 steps, which means it'll snap to every 10%, which is really cool because it makes getting one directly in the center a lot easier. So Control plus Shift will allow you to draw that in. So we can use it as a scalpel. We can use it as an insert edge loop tool. But last but not least, we can also use it as a samurai sword. So what does that mean? Well, let's say that I want to force in a edge loop in an area that probably is not going to allow me to draw in an edge loop very easily. So instead, let's say I want to just kind of slice it this way. Well, if I click on the outside and click and drag over it, you will see a line appear. This will allow me to slice through my object. Wherever I have it projected and wherever I'm laying over this edge, it will slice all the way through. So if I hold down, let's say Shift will allow me to snap it to different angles, but when I let go, it's not going to worry about whether or not it is keeping proper geometry. Instead, it's just going to slice it all the way through, allowing me to kind of do the old school samurai and anime tactic of it being cleanly cut all the way through.
Will that always cause like problem geometry though?
If we are careful about it, no. So if I go right here and Shift right click, bring up the multi-cut tool, and I make sure to not draw it across like weird angles on here. This right here is clean geometry. All these are quads because I stayed within the tracks of that edge ring. But when I start cutting across multiple different edge ring tracks, that's when we start running into that issue of problem geometry. And honestly, 9 times out of 10, if you're using the cut tool, you're usually using it to try to force 2 shapes together and setting up like almost an area where you can kind of start merging stuff together. Think of it as like cutting a piece of wood and then going back and sanding it down. So that way you can continue working.
Oh, okay. I was just curious because it changed when you deleted that. It went to the solid black, like it's not there. I didn't know if that.
So yeah, that's because we're looking on the inside of our object. Remember, Maya's only coloring that black to kind of allow us to see that, you know, this one is the back of the face, and to so that we can kind of keep track of what's there. When in fact, if we take this over to other programs, this is what we would actually see, which is if I turn on back face culling, we wouldn't see anything because that is the back of the polygon, and the back of the polygon does not get rendered.
Okay.
All right. So let's go ahead and bring that back. And so with that said, if you want to, you can go ahead and keep on like playing around with the different tools and kind of see what you get. But like I said, bare minimum that you have to do is just extrude out all the shapes to match the reference that we have right here. But if you want to go ahead and use this as a chance to play around, like, you know, I think one of the ones I usually do is if I go right here, Shift right click and insert edge tool. Put one in the middle right there. And since Tetris blocks usually have those little knobs that come off of them, I usually kind of show that off. So if I go right here, extrude that out, pull that out, and repeat that same process, we can kind of get that little rigid spiked look. And again, just play around. So that way you can have kind of a safe area to play around with these tools, kind of see what they do, kind of get a little bit of a taste for them before you start applying them to your actual objects that you're going to be building this week. With that said, I'm going to make sure that I didn't accidentally select anything right there. So on and so on. And we could probably keep on doing that right there. I have people that kind of like turn their L blocks into spaceships. That's fine right there. I just want to see that one, at least you did some extrusion, and 2, I do like to see what you can get done with some of these objects. As long as I see the Tetris blocks, we're fine. But with that said, let's go ahead and take our screenshot. So as always, I really don't need to see the text that was already in there. So we can go ahead and turn that off. Inside of our channel box / layer editor, which if that is not here, you can click on this icon to bring it up. Now, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it off over here. But then what we need to do is turn on wireframe on shaded. So right here, shading, wireframe on shaded, which we can see that it is Alt 5. And now let's go ahead and take our first screenshot. So over here, new. Yes. Sounding bad out there. Unless that's the AC. But I highly doubt that's the AC. And in this case right here, we're going to name this last name underscore first name underscore and intro to modeling. Save. And we want to make sure that we are saving as a PNG, because that's by default what when you use your screenshot tool on both Mac and Windows, that's what it prefers to save as. And then when we go to submit it, we want to make sure that we are submitting it to this icon right here. So use this icon right there to upload your images, so that way you don't lose points. All right. So any questions so far?
I got a question.
What's up?
You remember when you said that you go and reset the tools and the settings? Why does it get all messed up? Why does that happen?
It's not that it messes up. Like, it's not like the tool's breaking. It's just that it's using settings that you may not want to use for that particular object that you're working on. The thing is that Maya trying to help you out is remembering every little setting and every little change that you make to these tools. So that way, it saves you time when you use it again. But sometimes, like I said, your settings for one tool using on one object can be very, very particular about that one shape that you're trying to make. And it's not one of those things that the settings will work on everything. So from time to time, you will want to reset and go back to default.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so with that said, make sure I hit all my points right there, and multi-cut right there, how to be right there, different ways, how to resets, and there's so many tools. Like I said, make sure that you are checking out this video at the bottom. Flip Normal did a very great job of, like, you know, kind of like one-lining everything, going like, hey, this is the tool, this is how like it's used, and this is kind of like the end result from using it. And the main thing is to understand the end result, what these tools are doing, not just their names, what they are doing. Because if you can see what they are doing, then you can start looking at your object going and coming up with strategies on how to use these tools. So instead of me saying, all right, you have to use the extrude right there, ask yourself, what is extrusion doing? Well, if I'm looking at my object and how it's matching up to the reference, if I'm asking myself, all right, how do I build this? Oh, it just needs more geometry. Oh, if it needs more geometry, then that's the extrude tool. So with that said, let's go ahead and move on to our next subject, which is, let's talk about reference. All right, so everything that we build is to emulate something that exists or has bases that exist inside our real world. And that is everything, even like the more fantastical or alien-like objects. A lot of their stuff and a lot of their anatomy and the way that they function is based off of real world stuff. And that's how we make audience believe that our pixels and our 0 and 1s are the real thing. This is important. And one of the ways that we can achieve that is through reference. Reference is essentially videos, images of the objects that we are trying to build in our 3D world. Whether it's a car, with a car, we go and find reference of not only its shape by pulling up blueprints, we also look at it from different angles. Reference also helps us not only build it, but making sure that it lights properly and that it looks as close to the real world as possible. You should never assume anything. I know that everybody here has probably seen a chair or a door, and you just say, you know what, I could just build that without even looking. But here's the thing. You may not know the proper proportions of that door, the proper look of that chair, that kind of sense right there. And specifically when somebody's paying you to make it look like a certain thing. You can't just assume detail. You have to always make sure that you're reaching out for reference so you can make it as lifelike or as close to the art as possible. Now, there are several different types of reference. First, there is obviously concept art. Everybody loves concept art. Concept art is awesome. And that's where we can get into more of the fantastical parts right here. And what we're seeing is a character sheet right here, where we're getting a proper front and side and 3/4 views. So that is concept art right there. Next is just real world reference, which is, let's say I want to model that chair. And I know I keep on going to chairs, but I'm inside a lecture room, and that's what I'm seeing most of right here. So if I was to model that chair, real world reference would be me taking out my camera and taking pictures of it. Again, y'all are living a great time to learn this stuff. I remember back when I was learning this, when I needed reference, the notion of me having a phone that had a high definition camera on it was just, it would boggle my mind, because there would be times that like inside the parking lots would be what I'm trying to model, and I did not have any way of actually taking pictures of it. So you're living in a great time where if you need to see something, you can either Google it or take pictures of it yourself. But with that said, those are our main ways of actually getting reference. Now, there is limitations to the references. So even going back to that concept art is great, but it's a 2D medium, which means certain details that we're looking at this object may not read well in 3D. That's the whole concept of like us having that perspective window, which allows us to walk around, look at it from different angles, and see, all right, are all these details and features reading well in 3D, all right? But even when we come to real world reference, we have to take a couple things into consideration. One, it may not be a perfect angle. So when it comes to modeling, it is awesome to have our front and side right there and everything line up. That is awesome. That's what I hope for everything that I model. But that's not always the case, especially if you're working on a big production. Obviously, you know, if you're working on the next Uncharted, if there's ever going to be a new one, you're going to get tons of reference for the main characters and the different characters and like pretty much most of the humans. But when it comes time to model a barrel or a tire for a vehicle, they're either going to tell you to go find it yourself by Googling it, or you're going to have to go and shoot pictures yourself. And here's the problem with actually taking images, taking reference, is that not only does the camera have imperfections on them, but you yourself are imperfect. Depending on what angle you are or how you shoot it, you may distort its proportions, its scale. You may obscure, like, you know, certain details through shadows. And the thing is that with reference, we always have to take it with a grain of salt and use common sense with it right there by actually looking at, sizing it up, and coming up with strategies on what parts are working for us inside the 3D world and which parts are going to have have a little bit of that whole notion of close enough, right? You know, close enough works for hand grenades, horseshoes, and then also 3D reference as well too. Now, with that said, when it comes to reference, if we look right here, here's a good example right there. So this kind of runs the gambit of everything I was talking about. So first we have that witch hat. 9 times out of 10, that may be your reference that somebody's going to send you and say, hey, model that witch hat. Well, it's from kind of a bad angle, and you don't even get to see all of it. So what do? Well, one, you go online and try to find other stuff that is similar enough to that object to help you fill in the gaps. 2, you take visual cues from it. So we all seen a hat. We've probably even seen this Lego hat right there. So we can take visual cues on how to actually model it. Likewise, we have this image of this car coil right here. Now, it looks fine, but until we actually start really breaking it down. So if we look right here, we can see the imperfections of the person that actually shot it, which is, if we look at this, it's at an angle, so it's slanted. Also, it has perspective applied to it, because if you ever seen a car coil or even just seen brackets in general, this is all the same size right here. So the fact that we're seeing this slightly go higher than the middle part right there, and some parts looking like it's a little bit bigger, that's because of the perspective, the angle that it was shot at, adding that little bit of error. That's the right word. All right. So, and then last but not least, we have what you're actually going to be modeling later on next week, which is your Lego man, which is you get a blueprint. Awesome. These are great, but they're a little bit harder to gauge depth. Sometimes shadows and highlights can help us perceive the details that we need to model. So each one of these have their pros and cons. And it is our job as artists and also us from years of experiencing the real world to come up with solutions and try to find stuff to help us bridge those gaps that we're missing inside of our reference. Yeah. Now, how do you find more reference? Google. Google is your best friend. Also, take pictures whenever you can, especially if you do happen to have the objects that we are modeling. You're more than welcome to take as many pictures as you want. What you want to avoid looking for reference, one of the key things is it's not great to grab reference of objects in video games. Not so much the concept art. Concept art is awesome. But when we are grabbing reference of objects that are in, like, you know, a cartoon or in video games right there, they may already be stylized to begin with, and you're just essentially doing a copy of a copy. So you have to make sure that you sidestep that. Instead, it's better to try to go find the real world counterpart of it. And then the last thing that we want to use with our reference is a great way to strategize. So we talked about how we blocked out our objects on last Friday before the break, how we looked at our reference and perceived, all right, these are in different parts. Reference is a great time to strategize how you're going to build these shapes. Now, with that, let's go ahead and load up our second lecture activity, which is just going to be a brief kind of like a skill building process of just how we kind of look at our reference and break stuff down. So we're going to go ahead, download that. And as I do that, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And I'm going to copy that, go to my documents, 3DF, week 2. And we're still in lecture 3. And then I'm going to hit Control V. Okay, there we go. All right, now we did that. Let's go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and close that and minimize this. And we're going to set that project. So go right here, File, Open, Set Project, navigate to that 3DF folder, week 2, lecture 3, and then click on the main directory. So hit Set and hit Open. Continue. All right, so I'll zoom out a little bit right here. I don't know why this is all that long right there, but essentially all it's saying is we're going to use the grease pencil to pretty much pre-plan how we're going to build this object right here. We're going to look at the different shapes and how we would actually, what shapes we would actually start with. Now, we do actually have more practices that you can do if you want to, like how many parts would these objects be to help you like kind of number these things out. But this is not required for this lecture activity, only this one right here. Also, I will be using the grease pencil, which is a tool that allows you to pretty much just kind of like, almost like one of those teleprompter like pencils that you see in like football and any kind of sports where they draw all over the screen. It's the same way right here, which is I'll just be able to draw over my viewport. Now, if the grease pencil does not work for you, that's perfectly fine. What you can do as a backup is take a screenshot of this right here, the entire Maya program, and just either take it into Photoshop or whatever your favorite photo manipulation program and just draw over it that way. I've even had people print this out, draw over it, and then scan it back in and submit that. That works as well too. Hopefully it doesn't come to that. Still want to keep it as digital as possible. But from there, what we want to do is kind of look at our different objects and start picking out probably the best shapes to actually start with them. Now, we're going to keep in consideration that we're not going to be doing every single board on our object, but we want to make sure that we're kind of like assessing the more bigger picture of these right here. So the first thing that we're going to do is I'm going to select the primitive layer right here, make sure that that layer is selected. And I'm going to go ahead and click on this little icon right there. That is my grease pencil, my grease pencil. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and click that. Next, we want to go ahead and add in a frame, which this will allow us to start drawing. So I'm gonna go ahead, click that on. And now I will be able to start drawing over my surface. Control Z, or just Z. Now, if I want to change my color at any time, I can go right here, click on this little hyphen, and I will be able to change the color. Now, if you're on Mac, this is the point where it will probably yell at you because for some reason you have to give special permissions to your color picker. I think we went over this on week 1 right here, and for some reason Mac locks that out until you go and actually turn it on. But Maya is pretty good about like actually walking you through how to do that. So first, let's go right here. And I'm gonna pick like orange. So there we go. So last but not least is our brush size. So if I hit and hold down B as in boy and middle mouse click and drag, I can increase or decrease however big my brush size is. So if I go right here, that's really big, too big for me. So if I hold down B, middle mouse click and drag down to a smaller, more fine point, then I can kind of get something a little bit closer to what I need to be. Any questions so far? What's up? Yes. So yeah, now that I hit that frame right there, it popped up on the back in like, you know, any kind of school, like the overhead projectors. Me hitting new frame is like me taking another like piece of plastic cellophane and putting that down, allowing me to draw. All right. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and start breaking down some of the stuff right here. So first, let's look at this canopy right here. So with that canopy, probably what shape should we start with? And keep in mind, some of these will have kind of specific answers. Some of these have more open-ended answers. And the fact is that you can deviate from me if you want. But the idea is that like what we want to do is strategize. We want to try to pick the quickest solution, which means instead of us trying to figure this out as we're modeling, because right now we're probably really slow modelers, all right? That's a new skill that we're not used to. But pre-planning on a picture and being able to draw on it, that's going to be a lot faster and help us come up with a better strategy. All right, so I did see a couple people say cylinder, and I would say probably cylinder as well too. The reason why I would not use a plane, and this is a great chance for y'all to ask questions. These are the awesome questions that you can actually ask. Why would I pick this over another object? And this allows me to kind of go in depth about the way of my thinking. Now, keep in mind, my way of thinking may not make sense to you. That's why it's important that you go to labs, go to Discord help sessions so you can meet other artists and ask them, all right, how would you go about doing this right here? So you can see other people's thinking styles, different strategies, and then you can kind of piecemeal your own methods of working with Maya. So first, I would say cylinder, because for the most part, this is already kind of part of a cylinder. Remember, when we use a primitive, we don't have to use every part of it. We can just use the parts that we need. So in this case right here, I would say probably cylinder for that. And as I draw very poorly with my mouse, there we go. And we got that circled. Now, keep in mind, we want to make sure that we're not zooming in and out because that is locked on. So we will accidentally change it too much. What's up? What? Why not a pipe? We could do a pipe. I would probably, I just got asked why would I not use a pipe? Mostly because like the reason why I would not use it is it would just result in the same thing right there. So how I would do the cylinder is I would pretty much delete every face off of it except for the sides. And if I did the pipe, I would get the same thing as well too. So either one is interchangeable. So the pipe or the cylinder, I would still end up with the same result. Now, one of the ways that I do see that you're saying with the pipe right there is, yeah, for us to actually have it inside of our tarp, we would need to have a front face and a back face as well too. But one of the things that you're going to learn as a trick is whenever possible, we try to model stuff flat, and then we can always add thickness in later. So I can stay with just a cylinder right there and the outside of a cylinder, only have to worry about one side getting that adjusted. And then once I get in the shape that I like, I can always extrude for thickness. And we will learn more about that when we start talking about that on Wednesday. All right, so from there, let's go ahead and talk about the actual part of the chuck wagon, the wooden part. So let's go ahead and imagine that this is all one piece or just kind of multiple pieces. So in this case, what would we probably pick for, and let me go ahead and change my colors. Why not? Pink. So I'm getting a lot of cubes, and that, yeah, I would say probably cube's probably the best option because one, we have something that is already blocky and very angular. So that lends itself to the cube a lot better. And also that cube gives us a lot of options. We can either build the sides separately, or we can actually go to the extent of doing individual boards if we want to add in that extra detail, which in the case, if I was to go full out like production level modeling, yes, I would be modeling the individual boards. But let's go right here. Come on, Pinky. All right, there we go. So from there, let's go ahead and change this over to blue. And let's say the wheels right there. What would I go about with the wheel? What shape would I probably do? Now, there's multiple different answers, but we also have to perceive the shape that we're trying to make. Which one? So yeah, we could do a cylinder. That works fine. This would be one of those cases where the cylinder or the pipe would work perfectly fine. Now, with that right there, what you were saying as far as the axle and for the spokes right there, we got to keep in mind that those would be considered separate pieces right there, because even though that they're welded, we would probably still build them separate. And we'll see that in a few minutes when we actually model this. Now, we do get questions on why the pipe or the cylinder instead of the torus, because essentially the torus is just this, but a lot more rounder. Well, we have to look at what we are trying to build. For the most part, this little chuck wagon, its wheels are probably just flat, all right? They're just metal rims, and that's about it. Now, if I was trying to actually make a car tire, then I would probably go with the torus because it already has that roundness in it. So in this case right here, I would probably do the pipe. And then in that case right there, how would I do the axles and the spokes? You already answered that right there. That lends itself to the cylinder. So if I go right here, let's do another cylinder. I'll do green. So and that's how I would do this one wheel right there. Now, does anybody have any questions on what I would do with the other three wheels? How would I do the other three wheels? Yeah, probably clone it over. All right. And for the most part, that's all I'm not really worried about because that's going to cover the bulk of my object. But the main thing is that we should be taking away from this exercise is one, don't just jump straight into the deep end and just start trying to model. Because spoiler alert, your project for this week for your competency 2, and I'll go more in depth on it on Wednesday, you're going to be picking 5 props and modeling those 5 props and getting them textured as well too. And the thing is that a lot of people like to just look at the image and go immediately into modeling. The thing is that one, you're probably going to need more references to help you model that one object, and 2, you need to have a strategy. All right, if you go in there without a strategy, you run risking bad geometry or just incomplete models. So with that done right there, we're going to go ahead and take a screenshot. So this right here is good enough for me. So I'm going to make sure that I'm giving you the right information. So we're going to go right here, make sure that mine is maximized, and the camera where you use the grease pencil. So since I used the grease pencil on this front one right here, which is the one that it should open up as when we first open up this project. And we want to make sure that we can easily view it. So From here, I'm gonna go ahead and file, new snip, and file save as, and I'm gonna name this ref breakdown. Now, keep in mind, as long as you're submitting these properly, we're not going to see the name for them. Just make sure that you keep it appropriate, because I've had people accidentally missubmit it, and which means we're able to see the name, and I've seen some terrible names. So keep that in mind. Reference breakdown. Save. All right. And then I'm gonna go ahead and close that. And let's go ahead and make sure that I'm still staying. All right, so with that said, reference breakdown is our first step. Now let's start talking about primary form. So what is primary form? Primary form is our basic shapes that make up our object. These closely resemble primitives, and they are our foundational shapes. What does that mean? Well, the object wouldn't exist without that shape being there. So let's say, I used to have a picture of a eye screw in here. I don't know where it went to. All right, so and I don't want to, actually, I will search for a cup screw. I'm not going to search for the other name. All right. So if we look right here and we look at this object right here, so its basic primary form would be obviously the shapes that have to be there for it to exist in the first place, which means this little question mark shape going all the way down right there. So that would easily emulate both probably a cylinder and then probably a torus. Hint, hint, we're probably going to be building this next week. But where does its form start? Where does primary form stop? That's when we start getting into secondary form. So secondary form would be these shapes that have to be on top of the primary shape right there. So that threading would not exist unless there was already a foundational shape right there. That means that that is considered secondary form. So pretty much when we look at our object, we have to break it down into its base foundation shapes, and they usually typically are the ones that are closer to our primitive forms. That's why we always say, look at your reference and use that to break down the best strategy on how to use it. Now, it also goes by a different name as well too, which is blocking out. So we talked a little bit about blocking out on Friday of 2 weeks ago, which is blocking out is where we do our version of sketching. So if you were to draw anything, you wouldn't go immediately to the detailing. Instead, you would actually figure out the proportion, scale, all that part right there with quick sketches. Same way here. Proportion, scale is one of the first things that you want to always make sure that you get right. Because one, if proportion and scale is wrong, then our entire object will look wonky. Two, proportion and scale is harder to fix once we start adding in more and more detail. The more geometry we add, the harder it is to make sweeping detail changes. So that's why when we're blocking out, we want to make sure that we're paying attention to proportion and scale. Also, that's the stage that we want to make sure that we are paying attention to what is built into pieces. So looking at your chair, it wasn't made out of one. I keep on going to chairs. I don't know why. All right, looking at your computer, it's not just one huge chunk of aluminum. It's actually a bunch of manufactured pieces. We want to make sure that we are modeling it that way because one, it looks a lot more realistic when we go to render it and when we go to light it and texture it. But also it's a lot easier on us because we don't have to worry about those pesky edge loops going from one object into the other. We can localize them and restrict them to what they need to be used on. Now, let's go ahead and bring up our last lecture activity. So we talked about tools. We already know about our geometry. We broke down our object into its basic shape. So we got idea. We have a strategy on how to go about making our next object, which is we're going to build this thing. So let's go ahead and I'm going to download the right thing. So don't go right here. And we're going to go ahead and grab our wagon block out. Blockout. And we're gonna expand it. So show in folder. Come on. And I'm gonna control copy. PDF, week 2, lecture 3, and control V. All right. Now that that's in there, let's go ahead. I'm gonna close this out right here, which is I'm just gonna hit new so I can clear this out of Maya. Don't need that. And let's go ahead and go to open scenes and then set project. And then select the wagon blockout, hit set. And then we're going to open up our scenes. Now, hopefully we're getting into those steps of making sure that we open up properly, because if you notice so far in this lecture, everything that we've opened as far as project-wise has had reference images. Your reference images will not show up unless you properly open up Maya, properly set it, and then open up your scene. Make sure that you do all 3, or you won't be able to get to this. All right, with that said, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and we already have our reference images already set up in our image plane. So we have a side and a front or a back, depending on which way you want to really look at it. And what we want to do is go ahead and block out all these shapes right here. Now, keep in mind, we're going to be building everything except for these 2 right here. Now, if you want to go above and beyond, these 2 are optional. You don't have to do them, but if you want a little bit of practice, you can do the axle and the little suspension right there. But for the most part, we're going to be building everything else. So inside of here, we will have obviously our canopy, and then we will have our main board right here, like our main body, which is going to consist of a bottom and a left and right board and a front and a back board. Lastly, we're going to also be doing the wheel. The wheel will encapsulate the tire part right here. I don't know the technical name for that right there for chuck wagons. I'm sure that it has a technical name. Guessing. It's individual spokes, and then also its hubcap right here. So that hubcap will be 2 pieces. We can see it right here by the change in color. But let's go ahead and start that. So with our main body, what was the first thing that we picked for that right there? Cube. Now you're probably going like, all right, why are we starting with the main body? And this is my logic right here. I like to build off of things, which means I need a starting spot. Well, everything seems to be rotating around that main body. So really for me to get the canopy right, I need to have a body there first. For me to figure out where the wheels need to go or where they need to be positioned, I need a body there first. So I like to start with the central object first. Now, is that always the case? No, sometimes I'll start with the hardest part first and then work my way into the easier parts. Sometimes I will just pick something, right? And really all that comes down to is experience. And as you start making stuff, as you start building things, start making mental notes of your successes and your failures of that, and see what you can do to gain from those experiences. So with that said, let's go right here. And let's go ahead and bring in our cube. So I'm going to bring in a cube. I can either do that by clicking on this little icon if I'm in the poly modeling, or I can go right here, go to create polygons, go to cube. Or if I have nothing selected, shift right click. With nothing selected, I can go ahead and quickly get to my different polygon primitives as well by going right here. So shift right click. That is the context menu. Since I have nothing selected, then the context is, all right, well, you want something to be created. All right, so with that said, let's go right here. And now I have my cube. So let's go ahead and go through the thought process, starting all the way from lecture 1, which is when we were trying to put together the Mr. Potato Head. We're in that same position right here. Instead of us having completely done objects, we're actually building these objects as well. So what do I need to do with that cube? We're doing it each board. So like how we see those outlines right there. and how they're separated. So we have a left and a right board, we have a front and a back board, and then we have a bottom board. But first step, what should be my first step? Instead of like coming up with a whole entire strategy, like I said, let's break it into smaller problems. So what is my first problem? What?
Scaling.
Well, we can do the bottom board. Yep. And right there, drag up the bottom board. Right there, we need to get in position. And then yes, from there we can start scaling and moving stuff around. So one of the things I like to do, and here's my logic, is I will get looking right in one side and then go to the other side and make the adjustments that I need to. So that way I'm staying focused. I'm putting on blinders. So that way I'm not trying to fix too many things at the same time. Instead, we want to take it step by step. So from here, I can either start scaling, or I like to be a little bit more precise. So I like to go into vertex mode and select this, move that over. Select this, move that over. All right, so it's looking good. It's looking pretty spot on there. So at this point right here, we got to remember that we are in a 3D world, which means I need to pop over and just make sure that we're matching up on here as well too. So I'm gonna go right here, go on the vertex, select my vertex on the right side. So all of them on the right side, and just move them over. And then select my vertex on the left side, move that over, and biggity boom, we have our bottom board. Now, as you can see, we're a little bit off on one side compared to the other side. And that is just one of the imperfections with our reference. All right, so what I usually do is I'll usually pick one key reference and say, you know what, everything needs to match up to that. And then use the other ones to help, you know, kind of guide my hand a little bit right there. But if I keep on trying to make sure that it looks good on both when they're not completely perfectly spot on, it essentially turns into a game of herding cats. I'll fix one problem, which creates another problem in the other window. I'll go back and fix that, which creates another problem in the other window. So I want to make sure that I'm picking just one image and saying, all right, that's going to be the master image right there. We're going to make sure that everything matches up to that one. So, and you can see that this is a little bit too big. So we're just going to select all the bottom ones. I'm just going to bring this slightly up. All right. Hey, it is matching up. So in that case, didn't really matter. But again, what I just told you, make sure that you're picking one and kind of sticking to that right there. Still persist. All right. So in this case right here, what we want to do is, since I have this board already, I'm going to go ahead and probably just duplicate this up. So I'm going to hold down Shift, clone it up. Now we're going to go right here. I'm going to hold down D and V to move my pivot to that corner. And then I'm going to hold down V as in Victor and just move that down. So that way it snaps to the top right there. So that way it's making contact. Again, I don't want to eyeball this and try to do this by hand. Get used to snapping. Get used to snapping your pivots. Get used to snapping your objects, because not only will it be more precise, but it will be faster. And that's one of the weird combinations that you don't see that often, which is precision and speed. So with that said, I'll go right here. And I'm going to move my vertexes. So that way it matches up. This corner matches up with the corner right there. And then I'm going to select the top one right here. So I'm going to hold down and marquee, select and drag the top corner right there on the left. And then holding down Shift, I'm going to marquee select this right top corner. And I'm going to move them both up at the same time. So that way I can keep that straight. From there, I'm going to grab this corner and just move that over. Grab that corner, move that over. And it looks like it's matching up for the most part. It may be a little bit too high. We'll see. But now that we did that, what I'm going to do is go ahead and match up this. But before I add in that slant. I'm just going to get to the right size. So I'm going to use a visual cue down here. I can see the thickness of that board from that view right here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab all my vertexes on this side right here on the left side and just bring them over. So it matches up. So the bottom matches up with that corner right there. Select all the vertexes on the right side, and I'm going to slide that over so that way I can get the right thickness. And now I have that board. Now, I could add in the slant right now, but I may want to wait. Can anybody think of a reason why I would want to wait on adding in that slant? What?
To do it both at the same time?
You don't have to recreate that wave if you don't want to. But yeah, somebody, I think, said what I think I wanted to hear, which was always one of the key things that you want to do when you're looking at your reference is start picking out stuff that is very close to being duplicates or copies of each other. So we have the left and the right side right there. The only difference in detail between them is that slant. So to save me time, let's go ahead, duplicate this over. And now all I need to do is right click, move this over, right click, move this over. Now, if I went ahead and added in that slant and duplicated over, would not have cost me that much time to go back and reverse the slant and all that stuff right there. But any kind of strategies that I can come up from that saves me time from looking at the reference, just saves me minutes at a time, all right? Even if it's seconds, so seconds add up. So if we can think of any kind of shortcuts that we can use the advantage of in our digital world, which is the ability to copy and paste, well, not copy and paste, but duplicate objects, whatever we can do to speed things up and work smartly will help us in the long run. Now, with that said, let's go ahead and we got the bottom board right here. We got the sideboards. Now we need just the front and the back board. So let's go ahead. And in this case, I'm probably just going to make another cube because these shapes are a little bit too exaggerated now. So I'm going to go ahead and just move my pivot. D and V to that corner right there. And I'm going to snap this right there. So again, holding down just V as in Victor and middle mouse clicking and dragging over the corner where that vert is, it's going to snap to that. All right. So in this case, just going to go right here and size this up. So I'll go ahead and go into vertex mode. And the cool thing is that since I have both these boards in place, I can hold down V as in Victor and just move it over in the X. So that way it's snapping to that corner where that vert is. Same with right here, holding down V as in Victor, snapping that to right there to that corner. And same thing right here. V as in Victor, I'm going to move this up. And it's going to snap only in the Y to align with that right there. And then holding down V as in Victor and just pulling it over in the X right there to snap up to that board. Same thing, up in the Y with V held down. So again, notice how I'm holding down V is changing my icon to that circle. That means that snapping is turned on. Another thing to notice is that occasionally that can get locked on. So if you're not holding down X, C, or V, but it's still snapping, what's going on is that as I'm holding down these hotkeys, the hotkeys are for these icons right there. And occasionally they can get locked on. So if it's snapping when you don't want it to snap, just go up here and look at your magnets and make sure that none of them are highlighted. So I'm gonna hold down V as Victor and snap that over there. All right. Last but not least, I'm just going to make this as thin as it's supposed to be, which at this point, I will use a visual cue of how thick this board looks and how thick this board looks. So I'm going to assume using common sense, that more than likely, that's going to be about the same thickness. So I'm going to just go right here. Let's scale that down to about that size. And then I'm going to put one on the back. So since both these will have a slant in opposite directions, I'm just going to go ahead and duplicate this over. So I'm going to hold down Shift, clone this over. And now I can go right here and add that angle in. Probably stick in just a little bit more, just so that it has a little bit of an offset. Makes it read a little bit better in 3D. And then repeat that same process over here. I'll grab this. Right click, go to vertex. And again, make sure that you pay attention to what you have selected. So notice how I kind of very inaccurately selected extra vertexes. So we always want to make sure that we're double checking what we're doing. I'm gonna go right here, move that. And now call it a day. And now we got our main body, and it's matching up with our reference for the most part. Any questions so far?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
You know how you said that every color is one piece?
Yes. Well, that
So
was
you-
for week 1.
Oh, it doesn't. Okay, so it doesn't have any contents on this? On this week?
No, for the most part, it is the same strategy. So this right here, how this is all brown. Well, you want to make sure that you're paying attention to like the thick black lines. Those mean that it's going to be separate pieces. But obviously, when you get in the wheel has other black lines that kind of like segment it right there. We're not going to worry about that. We're going to actually just build this red part as one piece. So what you want to do is just emulate what you're seeing me do.
Okay, cool.
All right.
Hey, I had a question. So how do you, like, I know with the snapping and everything, but I know I'll probably have to look at it in lab too, but when you snap, how do you like get it to pretty much aim at the one that you want to go to?
So to aim for the one that you want to go to, either you get a little bit, kind of get close with using the arrow and just keep on pulling it until eventually it snaps to the right area. Or what we like to do is that I hold down the snapping key and then I will middle mouse click and almost scratch on the vertex that I want to snap to. So middle mouse click and wiggle on the vertex that you want to snap to. Now, keep in mind, it's going to move based on what part of the translate tool you have selected. So if I have only the y-axis selected, in this case right here, then it will only move in the y-axis because I'm locking the snapping to that axis. If I want to unlock on all 3 axes, I have to make sure that this is selected right here before I try to snap. But again, if I hold down V and middle mouse click and wiggle or scratch over where I want to snap to, it will hop over there. And again,
Okay.
it's one of those muscle memory things. It's going to take some time to develop that muscle memory. But once you force yourself to kind of get in that habit, it is going to save you a ton of time.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So at this stage right here, as always, this is my disclaimer that I like to always say. Never use me as an indicator on when to save. You should make sure that you are setting up a timer that will remind you to save at least every 10 to 20 minutes. That way, when you crash, which is going to always be inevitable, you hopefully do not lose all your work. Also, remember to save in increments. Do not save over the same file over and over again. If you lose your work, there's nothing that us instructors can do to recover it. So you want to safeguard as much as possible. So I'm gonna go right here and I'm gonna name this 001. Save. Continue. All right, so Last thing that we want to do, well, not the last thing, we're not even halfway done. So next, what I'm gonna do is I want to go ahead and start doing the canopy. Now I can either do the canopy or the wheel first. Which one should we do? Wheel or canopy? Canopy? All right, let's go ahead and do that. So we said that we would want to use a cylinder. So what I'm gonna do is go ahead and create a cylinder. Now, depending on what we want to do with our object and how round we want, we may choose to go right here and play around with this default. So right now it's set to 20. If we wanted to try to block this out a little bit easier, we could always try to decrease it to 16. Or if we want it to be a little bit more round, we can actually turn that up. Now, one of the key things that I want you to pay attention to as I'm moving this around is that I'm stopping on nice, clean, even numbers, right? This is important because, like I said, we're in a digital medium, which means that we can actually use that to our advantage, which means that if we have areas of symmetry, what we can do is model half of it, duplicate it over, merge it back together, and that way we do half the work, but still get the same results, which brings us to why we like even numbers. Why do we like even numbers? Yeah, it's easily divisible. If we have an odd number, then you're going to have this odd segment that's going to prevent you from doing any kind of symmetry. So nice, clean, even numbers. And sometimes a lot of us actually like to make sure that it's an even number and also divisible by 4, because sometimes you'll do like a fourth of an object and duplicate that around as well too, especially if it's a spiral cut. And again, that comes down to looking at your object, coming up with a strategy, and that will help you pick out better numbers for your primitives. In this case right here, I'm gonna probably do 16. And if you notice, if you're one of those people that probably already rewatched like my old lectures, you're going to notice that I do change stuff around, but the logic is still the same. All right, so I got this set to 16, I believe. I already forgot. All right, let's go right here. Yeah, 16. All right, so from here, what we're gonna do is I'm gonna get it to the size that I want it to be. So I'm just gonna kind of get this to about the right size. That's looking good right there. Let's see if I can go ahead and change this afterwards. I'm gonna go back here. I'm gonna make this a little bit higher res. 24, I like 24. All right, 24, it's gonna give me a little bit more shape. So in this case right here, what I wanna do is I'm going to go ahead and just right click, and I don't need these faces on the top and the bottom. So I'm gonna go ahead, marquee select this middle area right here, selecting the front and the back face. Likewise, I could actually select the whole entire object like so, and then hold down Control and deselect the center. Use my different control methods. Again, there's 100 different ways to do the same thing. Whichever way makes sense to you and helps you work faster is going to be the right way for you. But at least experiment with the different options and see which one clicks. All right, with that said, I'm gonna go right here, hit delete. Next, we are not going to need all this surface right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to delete the bottom right there. So probably these bottom 4, I'm not gonna need. So I'm gonna hit delete. So that way we are forming the canopy. Now you're probably going like, well, what about this part right here? Well, that's going to be probably an area where we're going to need more geometry, which when we need more geometry, what tool do we use? Extrude, all right? So that's a good component right there. But realize how extrude works. It needs a profile first. Do we have a profile defined yet? Not really, like we have the cylinder, but it's not making the shape of the canopy. So we want to define that profile first. Which means I'm gonna go right here. We're gonna go to vertexes. And actually I'm gonna delete 2 more faces on both sides. That's a little bit more clean. And we're just gonna go right here. And I'm just gonna go ahead and start lining this up with the canopy. Again, going back to modelers are usually called vert pushers. That's because that's essentially what we're doing. We can have a tool that does a lot of stuff for us, but at the end of the day, it's up to us to fine tune it. So what a student just asked was if it's going to be a little bit asymmetrical, understandable. And that's actually can add to the appeal and the detail of it. But if we want it to be symmetrical, what would we do? Well, in this case right here, I would just do one side, cut half of it off, and then duplicate it back over. And we do have tools, and we'll show you next week, especially the mirror tool. That's the whole purpose. When you go to model your Lego man, you're going to have several cases of symmetry. The arm is going to be the same shape on both sides. Your hip is going to be the same size, same shape on both sides. So in those instances, we do half, and then we just mirror it over. Yep. A great question. All right. All right, that is looking good enough for me. So in this case right here, I'm actually going to go ahead and kind of bring this all the way over. Bring this all the way over. I'm not going to worry about matching it up to that right there because we can use one of our tools that we talked about earlier today to help with that. But let's go ahead. Actually, that's our next step. So next is matching this angle right here. All right, so in this case right here, I could probably go one by one and move all those verts in. But can anybody think of any tool that we use today that would speed this up? What? Yes, the scalpel, but what version of the scalpel or the multi-cut tool? Yes, the samurai sword. Awesome. So what we're gonna do is, since we got that weird angle, let's go ahead and go to our multi-cut tool. And let's go ahead and click up here and just drag through and match up to that angle. Now that's a little off, so I'm gonna go right here and kind of play around with that. But now with that there, I'm just going to let go and drop in one cut that goes all the way through. And since I was technically following an edge ring, which is a set of parallel edges to each other, since I was following that track, I did not form any problem geometry. Let go. And now I just cut the excess off. So right there, delete. Go right there, delete. Now, if you want to, you don't have to. If you want to go in there and start doing those ridges, you can, because some people like to realize that and do that. But keep in mind, those ridges and that waviness of that right there, that's technically secondary form. All right. Our main base shape is the actual overall canopy. But last but not least, what I'm going to do is let's go ahead and focus on this one object. So we have all these other objects that are currently in the way. So if I want to only look at this one object, there's a couple ways that we could do that. We could hide everything or put them on layers. But one of the easier ways right here is this icon right here, which I always lose track of. So if I select this right here, if I click this icon, this will turn on what is called isolate selection. This is really great about getting our focus and clearing everything off so we can focus on that one object. But clicking that button is a pain in the ass. So instead, what we can do is hit Control-1. Control-1 will isolate our selection, and then hitting it again, Control-1 again, will bring back our selection. So pretty much we're activating it, and we can press it again to deactivate it. All right, so Control-1 hit. What I want to do is go right here, go into edge mode, select one edge, and I'm just going to double click that edge. And what that's going to do is follow all the edges around that edge loop, which this is technically not an edge loop or part of it right here, but since this is the edge on the outside or the border of our object, it's selecting all the border edges. But we do not need this one or this one. So we only want the end edges right here selected. So again, I did that by double clicking the edge. It selects all the edges of the border edge. And then I can hold down Control and deselect these two horizontal ones. Got the vertical ones, not the horizontal ones. All right. With that there, now, since we got a profile, Now we can go ahead and start extruding since we got our profile going on. So I'm gonna go right here. And instead of using shift, even though that would be very speedy, the problem with shift is that it will start trying to suck it down into where that axis is, or where that pivot is. Instead, I'm going to use another method, which is if we go right here, with this selected, I'm going to hold down shift right click. Likewise, I can hit Control E or go into the edit mesh option and use extrude there. But what we need is that local pivot. So right here, when we go right here, extrude, it defaults to that local pivot, allowing us to kind of pull this out on their own individual normals, which allows me to kind of get close enough right there while maintaining that hoop and also its position. It's still kind of wonky. We will go back and fix that in a little bit, but for the most part, that's getting us close enough to now go around and start placing this where it needs to be. So I'm going to go right here, marquee select to make sure that we select both the front and the back, and just move it into position. I like to start with the outsides and kind of just steadily work my way in. And the idea is I'm just trying to keep this a little bit uniform, almost evenly spaced. Maya likes consistency. Most programs do.
I have a question.
Yes.
You know how you say it goes into local view? Is it local view, right?
Local pivot. Yes.
How do you change it to like global?
So if you want to change it to global, let's go ahead and right here. That's a great question right there. So yeah, I actually am sorry that I did not bring this up earlier. I usually do, but right here, shift right click and go to extrude. Now, obviously don't do this on your object, but this is to kind of show the point. Right now it is by default, it goes to local. To change it to global, we can click this gear. This gear will switch it to global.
Okay.
And then we can click it again to pop it back to local.
Oh, okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Welcome. Now, let's kind of tweak this out. All right. Got that going on. Got that going on. All right. I think we're looking good. All right. So we got that all positioned, but now we're kind of running into this issue right here where it's kind of flaring out. Doesn't look that good. So we need to go back to being at that angle right there. Well, we can't use the same trick that we used last time where we cut apart and then try to angle it that way, because if we cut again, we obviously lose the part that we just extrude. So how can we make it flush again? Well, let me show you a little trick. So if we remember, we can move around our pivots using what key? What's the high key to move and make adjustments to our pivot? D, yes. So we've been using D to move around our pivot, but we have yet to really use D to mess around with the angle of our pivot. And remember, if we change around our angle, we can change around the way that certain tools will interact with our objects. More specifically, we can change how scaling works. Remember, if we scale something down to 0, it becomes flat. Well, what if we tell it flat is at that angle? So let's go right here, select this. I'm gonna hold down D. Now, if I hold down D and click anywhere off in the wilderness, that will reset my pivot. So that's a quick way of getting it back to where it needs to be. But with D held down, what we want to do is rotate it to where one of the axes is following that angle right there. So we have right here our Y. So I'm gonna rotate this with D held down to match that angle as close as possible. So now when I go right here to R, I can now scale this flat to where it's matching up with that angle. Now, is it changing its shape a little bit? Yeah, but we can make those adjustments. And honestly, it's close enough for me. And then we just repeat that same process. I'm gonna go right here. I'm going to rotate this to where Y is matching up with that angle again. And scale that flat. So now has that nice angle and everything looks good. Now, keep in mind, that was a really wonky way to use our pivot. So in this case right here, see how like my pivot looks all kinds of jacked? Well, this is a good case where we used certain settings to get a certain benefit, but past that, those settings are not going to help us really on anything else. So that's a good indicator that we probably need to reset our tool and maybe even reset our pivot right there. Go right here, reset tool, reset pivot. Go right here, reset tool, reset pivot. All right. Now I'm gonna go right here, bring everything back, select everything, set pivot, delete history, freeze transforms. Kind of get that cleaned out because I am about to do another save. So right here, if I'll save as, I'm not saving over the same one over and over again. So I'm gonna go right here, 002, hit save. And now let's continue working. I do need to make some adjustments right here. This is colliding through my object. So I'm gonna go right here, kind of just bring that out. Just bring that out a little bit right there. So that way it reads a little bit better in 3D. All right, and then there's our canopy. Any questions? All right, so with that done, now it's time to do the wheel. All right, so with the wheel, let's go ahead and start with the red part right here. So the red part, we already figured out was a pipe. We could always do it with a cylinder and then extrude for thickness if we wanted to, but either way, it's perfectly fine. But let's go right here to polygons, go right here to pipe. And what we want to do is get this to the proper size. We're gonna move this over. And then use our handy dandy defaults right here and change this so our radius needs to go up. Now, I'm doing this by clicking the name and middle mouse clicking and dragging inside the viewport. Now, sometimes those steps can be a little bit too high. So to help make it smaller increments, I can hold down Control as I middle mouse click and drag, and that will give me smaller increments to adjust. Now we want to go right here, change our thickness. Probably bring this down just a hair. Honestly, that is close enough for me. Probably go up a little bit higher. All right, and then now we just need to get the thickness. So I'm gonna go right here. And just kind of squeeze that down to the right size. All right, now, as you can see, I'm not adding in that angle yet. Can anybody tell me why I'm not adding in that angle? How it's like tilted out and that, well, what it's technically called is chamber. What's up? Exactly, yeah, like I'm going to be making duplicates of this right here. So I want this to be as close without adding in that unique detail, because I do have the same wheel that's on the opposite side, but also I will have cases, like you said, that I have two smaller wheels in the front. So I'm gonna have to make those adjustments. So I want to kind of pretty much get almost like how when you start making like a quilt or something like that, you have a pattern first and then you go off of that pattern. Same way right here. I want to make a good foundational shape that later I can add in those unique details as needed. So with that, we're gonna go right here and let's go ahead and model in the rest of this right here. So I'm gonna go ahead and let's go ahead and I'm gonna say go ahead a few more times. Go ahead, go ahead, go ahead. We're gonna make a cylinder. And with that cylinder, we're gonna make that hub. And type in -90. And get that to the right size. So same way right here. And I'll scale down. Get that close enough. And then I'm going to take the verts right here. I'm going to use snapping to make sure that they're aligning with the other side of my tire. So I'm going to hold down V as in Victor and just drag my X axis until it snaps up right here. And then grab these right here on the right side, just marquee select, grab them all, hold down V and snap them to the same thickness as that rim. All right, now we did that. We can see that it kind of tapers in like that. So I need probably more geometry to do that. So that is a good indicator that I need to extrude that out. So a quick way I can extrude that out, just showing you different options on how we can select them. I can either use marquee select and select this out right here. I could also click them one by one. But another thing that I can do is if I want all those faces selected, I can go in the vertex mode. And then with that one vertex selected, I know it sounds like it's unintuitive, but for selecting faces, I'm selecting a vert. But since that vert is part of all these faces, I can go right here, right click with control held down and tell it to go from that one vertex to the faces that is connected to. So again, using our control right click and our selection marquee menu to transfer our selections to different types of selections, making our life a little bit easier. And then from there, we're just going to extrude this in. So that way that circle fits about the size of that little inner circle right there. And then just bring it out. Now we're not going to match it up completely 100% because again, its position and its look is based off the idea that this is angled. So with that right there, for me, that is close enough. Now, as you can see, again, this is not perfect reference. One, it's not real reference. It's more of like concept art / blueprints. But notice how these are perfect circles on something that is chambered out like that, which means those circles should not really be. They should have like a little bit of perspective. But since this is a blueprint, it is making a few more judgment calls, which means on our end, we're going to be making judgment calls as well too. All right, so right click, go to object mode. And then last but not least, we need that little last, I don't know, is it a rubber piece or something like that? Which really, that's just a cylinder. So I'm gonna just go right here, make another cylinder. Turn it 90 degrees, -90. And again, with our pivots, holding down D as in dog, V as in Victor, snap in our pivot to that bottom pivot right there. Letting go of D, but keeping V held down. We're gonna hold down. With this selected, our 3 axes unlocked. I'm gonna hold down V as in Victor and middle mouse click and wiggle over that middle vertex right there. Wiggle. Very professional term right there, wiggle. And we're just going to scale it down and scale it about the same size as that right there. All right, looking good so far. Keeping it pretty basic. Any questions? All right, so with that said, let's go ahead and make the spoke. So if I go right here, let's go ahead and hit create. And we're going to go and do a cylinder. Now, since these spokes are pretty small, I'm probably not going to stay with that 20-sided cylinder because, well, you know, smaller things, they have more of a perceived roundness. So we can actually go a little bit lower to make our life a little bit easier. Now, keeping it at 20, would that kill our model? No. It's just more geometry you have to worry about when you are in the blocking out phase. Now, we don't want to go too crazy low. Like we don't want 3 because that's no longer round. But, you know, like I wouldn't go lower than, you know, 8. 8's fine. So now we're going to go right here. I'm going to make this slimmer. It's a frame. So I can use my 2-axis scale right here. Just kind of taper that in. And just kind of scale that up where I don't want to stick it through too much, but we can have it like slightly penetrating through. So I'm just going to make that slightly smaller and probably just a hair thinner. Now, it does flare out at the end. So what we're going to do is I need to add an edge loop right there. So I'm going to go ahead and edit mesh tools right there. Insert edge loop tool. And we're just going to drop one right there. Again, the power of the edge loop. We need edge loops to preserve the shape and ones to change it. So in this case right here, we have one to preserve the roundness and the thickness of my cylinder. And then the bottom edge loop right here is going to change it. We're just going to flare that out just a little bit. Probably make it oval like that right there. That reads a little bit better. All right, so now we got that in there. I'm going to make sure that it's in the center right there. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So we need to do that 13 more times, right? All right, so what do we need to do? Clone it, all right, but how? Or we don't just hit shift and move them and then twist them around each time? The pivot. Exactly. So yeah, you're both. And you're exactly right. So what was just said was instead of just cloning it, instead make sure that we understand what is happening when we rotate, scale, and translate. It's happening based off the pivot. So we put the pivot around the axle, then it's going to rotate around it, which means if I go right here, hold down D and V, move it to right there. I'm going to actually go right here, spin this to where it's matching up right there. And then I can hold down shift and rotate it some more. Now it gets a little wonky. So you want to let go of shift the second that you got done cloning. But yeah, just go right here, spin it around and repeat. Or I can just hit Control D, make my life a little bit easier. All right, Control D, spin, Control D. Now again, make sure that you're either using Shift to clone or Control D to copy and duplicate. Do not use Control C or Control V. I know that a ton of different programs got you used to using that, but copying, pasting geometry can break them. Because remember, when we are making these objects, it's not really objects. It's actually little boxes with a bunch of math in them. And that math is connected to other little boxes. And when we copy and paste, it doesn't always make those connections properly. So Control D, which is duplicate, or the clone tool, they are actually making sure that our the right connections and making the right transitions. All right, Control D. Make sure that we don't hit F like I just did. Well, you can hit F if you want to. It's gonna just frame up. But yeah, there we go. That is close enough, yes. Because at the end of the day, when our audience sees this, they're not going to have the reference up. Now, there is cases where you have to make sure that you're spot on, but then other cases where close enough is good enough, all right? Because we're in a very entertainment-based industry. Now, if you're going to production, by which I mean what you're modeling is actually going to become a prototype, then yes, you have to be spot on to the millimeter. But that's more AutoCAD, which is the more architectural and engineering level of Maya. Maya is more production. Hey, let's make cool things and make them explode. But yeah, with this right here, close enough is going to be good enough. Now, if you're modeling like the next Ferrari for the next Forza game, you better be as damn well accurate as possible, because car nuts will be able to call you out on it. So with that said, now we got our wheel done. So what we want to do is I want to go ahead and duplicate this over to the other side. So to do that, well, you would think logically I could go ahead and grab all of these and just hit duplicate and move them around, right? Just hit duplicate and then just spin them around, right? Problem is that each one of these objects, they're different objects, obviously. Well, they all have their own individual pivots. So even though I'm only seeing one pivot, I'm actually activating all their pivots and moving them based on their own pivot location, which is giving us this weird pinwheel look, which is pretty cool, but not helpful whatsoever. So instead of having multiple objects with multiple pivots, I need a way to tell this to have only one pivot without combining them together. I want to keep them separate. So that's where we enter into the notion of groups. So what we want to do is we want to go right here, select all the parts of my wheel. And inside of here, we want to go back to our friend, the outliner. So remember, the outliner is a laundry list of everything that's inside of our scene. What does that mean? Well, we have all our objects that we built right here. But what we want to do is have a way of organizing them. And by organizing them a proper way, we can also tell them to act as one without combining them. And that's where we enter into the logic of groups, G-R-O-U-P. And it's a way of essentially taking multiple objects and putting them into a cardboard box. If you put stuff in a cardboard box, you can pick up the box, move them around as one, but you still can pick out individual pieces as you need them and still interact with them as such. To do that, with these selected, we can go right here to edit and then group. Or do what the cool kids do, which is hit Control G. Control G will group it. What that will do is essentially place it into a cardboard box that keeps it organized, but also allows us to move it as one. So if I go right here, I can move this around, but it's not one piece. I can still access the individual pieces and make adjustments as needed. Now, to quickly manipulate your groups, if I select an object that's inside of a group, I can hit left or right on the keyboard. that will cycle through the objects within that group or that level of the hierarchy. But another quick way is if I select one object I know that's in the group, I can hit up on the keyboard and that will select the group. So your arrow keys, technically what they're doing is popping in between the different levels of the hierarchy. Up goes up in the hierarchy, which happens to be our group. Left and right will maneuver between the objects within that same hierarchy. And then pressing down will go into the hierarchy. So if I actually go right here and press down, now I'm inside my group, able to move around. Need some water. All right. So last but not least, actually, I don't know why I keep on saying that. We still have other things to do. All right, so let's go right here. With this selected, let you know when we create a group, by default, its pivot will usually generate at the center. So if we want to make any kind of real manipulations to it, we want to go right here and center our pivot. So now we got that right there. So now with the group selected, I can hit Control D to duplicate it. And now we can spin this around. I'm going to type in 180 and just move that over. Now at this time, this is probably where I would add that chamber. What's up? So yes, we will learn how to combine. By which the word combine is kind of misleading. Better way to say is unify. But what we'll do is tell Maya that these separate objects, consider them one object. By doing that, that will allow us to actually use single object tools on them. Okay, well, there's also parenting, P-A-R-E-N-T, and then I-N-G. That is a way of kind of pretty much gluing separate pieces to one piece. So when you select that one main piece, it selects all the children below it, but they're still technically separate pieces. But that's a little bit of a higher level concept that we're not going to really touch on. But we want grouping right now because that is a way of organizing, but it doesn't tie our hands behind our back by forcing us to have multiple pieces be merged together. Okay. So with that said, I'm gonna go right here. I'm going to move my pivot down to here. So that way I can tilt it just to match up a little bit right there. So we got that a little bit of a tilt. That's tilted enough for me. D and V, that's right there. Tilt this as well. Ooh. Make sure that we have the right thing selected. So I'm gonna go right here back to my group one. Hold down D and V. Move that. And then I'm gonna select both these. Hit Control D. And move that over. Let's see if I can do these both at the same time. Maybe, maybe not. All right, so I'm going to scale it only in one axis, meaning two axes. So I'm gonna hold down Control and drag on, what is this one right here? I believe it's the X-axis right here. So that way it doesn't get any flatter. And that is just a quick way of doing this one right here. We can also just grab the 2D one right there, but what we're trying to do is scale it down until it's about the right size. And that is looking close enough right there. And people are clapping. All right. And now we are good. At this point right here, I would probably select everything. Go to center pivot, delete history, freeze transforms. And then from there, probably hit save. But now we're ready to actually take our screenshot. So what we want to do is make sure that we're framed up and everything. So frame up, frame up, frame up. Get a nice little like perspective view right here. And then Alt 5 or Option 5 if you're on the Mac. And I know, make sure that I'm giving you the right instructions. So right here, make sure that you're in 4-panel view. Make sure that you have wireframe unshaded turned on, and make sure that's easily viewable. Make sure that you're following these submissions for each one of these right here, because I'm going to just warn you in advance. We will have a lot of people that are not going to be happy about their electroactivity grades, because while part of it is, yes, did you do the activity? Did you match what we were trying to go for? Did you get it complete? That is part of your grade. The second part is, did you follow the proper instructions on how to submit it? And missing that second part can result in you getting 25% counted off from the get-go. So you want to make sure that you are following those steps as closely as possible, by which I mean you want to not follow them as closely as possible, do them exactly the way that I showed you. All right, so how are you able to move all the screens with the middle mouse click? So if I hold down Alt/Option and middle mouse click and drag, I can move these around. So from there, I am going to go to New and take a screenshot of the entire screen. That's another big one. Make sure that you do the entire screen, and then go right here, File, Save As. And that is going to be our block out. I forgot the name of it. All right. Any questions? All right, let me go ahead and double check, make sure that I didn't miss anything. We're not going to talk about your competency 2 until Wednesday. I want you to focus on getting your week 1 stuff done. Now, with that said, what is going to be the goals for the rest of the week? So today we went over basic modeling tools. We're kind of like putting that on your plate, letting you know, all right, so we went through the limitations and what we can do with just the basic shape. Now let's talk about the tools that we can use to start making more complicated objects and constructing them properly. So that was today. Now we gave you a taste. We only showed 3 tools, and you probably noticed that inside the menu, there's probably more than 3 tools inside my menus. I strongly suggest, if you can, explore, test stuff out, watch that video I showed you, because you're more than welcome to use any tool outside of the bevel tool or the Boolean tool to make your week 2 stuff. None of the stuff that I showed you today can be used on your week 1 stuff. Make sure that you're following the restrictions that we have for competency 1. Now, with that said, today was introducing modeling tools. Wednesday is going to be showing you different modeling techniques that we can use, along with deformation tools that we can use. But one of the key things that we're going to be going over is we introduced problem geometry. Now we're going to talk about how we go about finding it and fixing it, and why it is problem geometry to begin with. And then lastly, on Friday is going to be where we start talking about the other world of our polygons. We've been dealing with 3D, but on Friday we will start talking about the 2D elements and how we apply color and textures to our objects. All right. With that said, as far as your week 1 stuff, make sure that you are aware of the deadline that is tonight, which is 11:59 p.m. Eastern time. Make sure that you're aware that the submission for that right there is Eastern time, and then also your timestamp is based off of when it finally uploads. Also, make sure that you're following all the instructions and submitting it correctly. We do have videos that covers a lot of this right here, so make sure that you watch them. So if I go right here to the right window, preview, intro, competency 1, And if we go right here, not only do we have an overview of what to do in the project, so hopefully by now you've already watched this. This should not be the day that you are watching this for the first time. But if we scroll down, we have our Sketchfab, we have all the instructions that go over how to submit this properly. And then we also have a guide, because you're going to be turning in your entire project with only the stuff that we are looking for. We do not need your extra saves or anything like that. Make sure that you're only submitting what we're asking for. We have a video that covers that right here, the professionalism and saving. So make sure that you are checking that out right there. Also, make sure that you're utilizing today's lab. If you need the extension, make sure that you're messaging me, Brian, Chris, Tim, whoever's running your section. It is good practice to ask for the extension on the projects that you need. So if you need an extension for this, write in here, say, hey, can I get an extension on that? It makes it easier for us. But yes, you want to get into the professional habit of requesting extensions if you're not going to meet your deadline. Now, keep in mind, if you request an extension, you automatically get it. So if you do not hear back from us tonight, don't freak out and contact Full Sail Support. All that's going to do is make us have to write 2 emails instead of 1. All right, so usually I'll wait until tomorrow to start putting in your submission. So if you ask for extension, just keep in mind you automatically get it. Extensions are automatically 3 days past the original deadline. It's not from when you actually get a feedback from us saying, hey, you got an extension. The max that you can submit this project late is Thursday, by the end of Thursday. If you submit on Friday at midnight, which is 1 minute past Thursday, it is a 0. So make sure that you utilize your extension wisely. I think that's about it. All right. Make sure that you go to the lab. Make sure that you utilize the Discord help sessions. I believe Wade's going to be in there from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. tomorrow. So you definitely can hop in there, ask questions, do all that stuff. Other than that, I will see you on Wednesday. Bye.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Okay, I had to download. I was trying to get to 2020.4, and
Yes.
I upgraded my Mac, and it says it finally got through, and it says Mac OS Big Sur. Do I need to continue on that? Is it gonna mess up my program and delete everything I got, or what?
Well, that's a Mac OS update, and I would say if you can avoid upgrading your OS, I would just avoid and just say, hey, I don't want to upgrade. Especially with the new OS update happening up soon, it can conflict with stuff. So I would suggest, if you can, just don't upgrade to Big Sur. But yeah, like Mac OS upgrades and Maya updates are completely different things.
So how do I upgrade Maya? Because when I tried to, it wouldn't do it. It said it was an error or something, and it wouldn't upgrade.
So like I said, hop in the lab and they will walk you through how to pretty much essentially what you're going to need to do. If you cannot download it from the website that we have right here. So if I go right here to preview and go into course overview, and not that one right there, but installation instructions, go to Maya. If this download link right here is not working for you, then it will need to be going to autodesk.com, logging in. Go away, honey. All right. Logging into it. And from there, you will be able to access your products and services. And inside products and services, you should be able to grab product updates. And then you should see Maya. All right, so what you're going to want to do is find the Maya 2020.4 update and download it from there. That is the place where you can find another download link. And once you download it, you're just going to install it.
Okay.
Okay. But with that said, if you have issues with that, definitely make sure lab starts at 5, which is in about an hour and a half. So you can hop in there and be able to screen share with them, and they can help you with that.
Okay.
All right.